Waldy and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to the podcast they couldn't stop, Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. Now, I'm Waldemar Luszczak, art critic of the Sunday Times here in London, and sharing the reins with me on this chariot of fire is the estimable art historian and farmer, Dr. Bendor Grosvenor. Now, Bendy, this might be the podcast they couldn't stop, but they did manage to get rid of me for about a month or so, and you've been holding the fort alone. It's been Bendy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. And I must say, you've been absolutely brilliant. These deep dives of yours, so interesting. So you haven't missed me at all, have you?
No, we've done marvellously well with that, thanks very much. And I was really enjoying being in charge of all things like the introduction and all that sort of stuff. But here you are, you've come back and you've grasped the reins again, which is your prerogative because, you are top dog, Wald. And I have missed you, so please actually tell me, and the listeners, what you've been up to all this time. Where have you been, international man of art mystery?
Well, I've been practicing my top dog moves, and as you well know, that is not true at all. Now, I've been sort of hiding in work. I've been going around Poland with another estimable art historian called Janina Ramirez. And you know Janina, she's a fantastic medievalist, professor of art history at Oxford. She's a wonderful presence, and amongst her many, many, many great features is the fact that she's mostly Polish, right, like me.
Oh.
So we've taken it upon ourselves to restore Poland's reputation to the high point that it used to reach back in the 17th and 16th centuries, when it was one of the largest countries in Europe, major powerhouse, European powerhouse. And it seems to have been forgotten in recent times. People just don't seem to know much about it. I mean, they go on about Polish plumbers and things, but not about the great things you can see in Gdańsk and Warszawa and Wrocław. So Janina and I have been doing a kind of road trip around Poland, picking up amazing sites, having deep, deep, deep discussions, not quite as deep as your dives, which are just sensationally deep and brilliantly deep. But we have been trying to kind of get under the skin of Poland a bit. So all that's hopefully coming up in a few months' time. We've been deep in the edit, and it's been great fun doing it. Wonderful working with Janina, who's a deep talent. I hope we get her on the podcast sometime. She's not as good as you, of course, but she is pretty damn marvellous.
Well, we need more Polish art historians in the world, so I look forward to seeing that. Do we have a channel for it to be on, or a time, or anything like that to keep our eyes out for?
Not yet. I'm holding back. There's been millions of people, as you can imagine, dying to hear about Poland and to find out more about it. I mean, there's a bidding war going on, a major bidding war between all the streamers. I mean, even Hollywood probably will want to get involved at some point. But at the moment, none of them have actually coughed up the cash, so we're still a little bit in limbo. But it will happen, I'm sure, and you'll be the second person to know as soon as I've told my mother, who's up in heaven now, I hope, and dying for me to do this.
Good, marvellous. Well, we've got so much to catch up on, Wald. Where are we going to go first?
Well, yes, now that I'm back, as you said, I get to choose the subject today. So I thought we'd make this an apocalypse special, right? Apocalypse special. There's several reasons for that, and we'll go into them later. But principally, it's because in Chinese cosmology, which I'm sure you know a lot about, 2026 is the year of the horse. Right? Not just any old horse, but the fire horse, which is a especially exciting horse in the Chinese zodiac. Now, it so happens I was born in the year of the horse, right? And it only comes around every 12 years because there's 12 Chinese zodiac signs. So that makes this a really special year. And I thought, basically it was the duty, really, of the Waldy and Bendy Awards, in that case, to choose the best horse in art, right? But one that is not by George Stubbs. Now, that's because we've had Stubbs on a lot. There's a big Stubbs show coming up at the National Gallery, so I'm sure you'll want to talk about that. But also because Stubbs, he didn't really do apocalyptic horses, did he? His were more quotidian, weren't they, Bendy?
Well, he did lots of horses being frightened and about to be eaten by lions and that kind of thing. So apocalyptic enough for the horse, if not for the viewer. But you're right, we should keep Stubbs out of it because it's no contest if you let the greatest equestrian artist of all time enter the lists of any pursuit of the greatest horse painting. So we should keep Stubbs out of it. And you're right, there is a National Gallery show on Stubbs coming up very soon. And also, if listeners are so minded to find out more about George Stubbs, I have an article about him in Country Life magazine coming out within the next few weeks, so you can keep your eyes peeled for that.
Isn't he also mentioned in depth in a superb tome about the history of British art that came out not too long ago, called The Invention of British Art, by a major art historian called Bendall Grosvenor? I believe Stubbs features prominently in that as well, doesn't he?
He does, because he's very important. And I have the book here. I'm lifting it up to the camera for anyone watching. Do you know, while you were away, I was invited to be on the BBC News about something. I can't remember what it was. And just as they cut to me in the studio, live now to Dr. Bendall Grosvenor, I cheekily put this on the shelf right next to me. So the book has been getting lots of plugs. So thanks for another one.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I would have stuck it behind me as well, but to be honest, I forgot. I've got a picture by Hans Baldwin Green up there instead. But next week it's coming back because it's a great book and needs lots of reading. But yes, as you say, you deal with Stubbs in that a lot, and there's the Stubbs show coming up. So later on, we're going to be picking the apocalyptic horse, which is not really a Stubbsy horse. But in the art world, Bendy, in the art world, it's never a dull week. And this week, it's no exception, is it? It's been as troubling as ever. It's shocking news from the art world. Yes, Bendy, shocking news from the art world. Now, while I've been touring around Poland, you, as always, have been keeping your ear to the ground because you do that better than anyone else. And I know you've been keeping me kind of abreast of things, but it's been a troubling week, hasn't it? Or at least an exciting week. Lots of things have happened.
Major news, Wild, from New York. Do you remember, before you went away on the podcast, we discussed the discovery of a previously unknown drawing of a foot with a beautiful big toe by none other than Michelangelo. In fact, it's a study for one of his figures in the Sistine Chapel, Wild. Anyway, this was finally sold at Christie's in New York last week, and it made, guess what? Did you see what it made?
No, but I bet it was a lot, right? Go on, tell me.
Well, the estimate was, I think, $1.5 to $2 million. And it made, with commissions and everything on top, $27.2 million.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
That's a lot of money for a small
It's tiny.
drawing.
It's about that big. It's about 4 by 5 inches.
Yeah,
So-
small drawing of a foot. You know, what can I say? Listen, do you remember when you first pointed out that this was coming up for sale, that it had been rediscovered? I mentioned to you, I mean, I basically crucified myself by suggesting that I thought it might not be authentic. And that's only because, first of all, I'm pals with Britain's greatest forger, Sean Greenhalgh, and I could just see him knocking out something like this. But also because it was somehow an unlikely thing, you know, a drawing of a foot in the middle of a bit of paper. It's a small subject. It's doesn't make sense really for why Michelangelo might have drawn it with such care. So I wasn't deeply convinced it was a fake or anything, but I had my suspicions. And now, I mean, when I've seen it gone for that amount of money, I'm in kind of shock, really, however much you like Michelangelo. And I mean,
Are you going to give us a world exclusive scoop that it's actually a Sean Greenhalgh?
No, I'm not going to say that. But I will tell you one thing, and that is that, according to the Chinese zodiac, do you know what Michelangelo's birth animal was?
Snake.
He was no, that's somebody else. In fact, that's you, Bend, or you're the snake. But Michelangelo, 1475, right? He was the sheep, which is a bit unexpected, isn't it? So his sign is the sheep. But no, that's not the big surprise. I just thought that it's such a lot of money for what is unquestionably a minor work. And I think it tells you far more about the reason why people are buying stuff these days. The billionaires are spending this amount of money on smaller things. There's a trophy art acquisition rage going on, isn't there? And people are buying stuff just because of the names of the artists. And I'm not saying that I don't respect or love or admire Michelangelo, because believe me, I do. I mean, I think the Sistine Ceiling is the greatest single artwork ever made, and this is from it, so that makes it something important. But 20-odd million quid, such a lot of money for a single artwork. And it means that no museum can afford that, can it? Only the super rich can afford it.
Well, as I like to say on this podcast, nothing brings out people's inner communist more like a high price in an old master sale. But, there were high prices across the board in the old master sales. And I do think, actually, that it's not just people buying trophy names. There seems to be a little flicker of rekindled interest in all things old master. And I think it's no coincidence that this has happened at the same time as, there's economic trouble around the world, Bitcoin and things like that are faltering. And I wonder if also contemporary and modern art market prices are faltering. And I wonder if people people a little, what we like to call a flight to quality. And you don't get much more quality than a Michelangelo foot. So we should keep an eye on that heating up, Old Master Market Wild.
Okay, well, you keep an eye on that. I'm just too poor to even look at it. It shocks me every time. And as you say, it brings out my inner Karl Marx, the idea of someone spending that much money, which could keep so many African villages going for so long on a single foot. But anyway, what else is happening in this terribly exciting time in the art world?
Well, slightly less exciting news actually for the National Gallery in London. Well, my colleague on the art newspaper, Martin Bailey, broke a story last week saying that, would you believe it, the National Gallery is facing a deficit, financial deficit, a bit of trouble in the accounts there. At the moment, it's about £2 million, and it's going to be rising next year to something like £8.2 million. And this is a real shock to me. I don't know what you think, Wild, on the back of, do you remember we discussed a few weeks ago that extraordinary successful fundraising of Gabriele Finaldi, raising all that money for the new wing, hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. So they're rich in one set of the accounts and struggling for another. And it looks like various job cuts are going to be on the horizon, and they're talking about cancelling all sorts of projects and things like that. So surprising.
Tragic, really. I mean, I love all those real people that you meet when you go to the National Gallery. And by that I mean, some of the guards, they're always very knowledgeable. Some of them I've known for years, really. And it's always good to stop and have a chat with them. And there's curators I like talking to and various bits of other staff, And if their jobs are being threatened, I think we sort of know the real reason for this, don't we? It's to do with the growth of AI, people's jobs being replaced by assorted bits of technology, isn't it? And it is this vanity museum creation and expansion, with museum after museum getting bigger and bigger and opening whole new spaces, which have been gobbling up the money. And it leaves people who work in museums in a very vulnerable situation. I mean, not just at the National Gallery. They look at poor old staff at the Tate. I mean, they're threatening to go on strike again because so many of them have been underpaid, laid off. I mean, it's not as if they get paid a lot of money to begin with. And I think, museum directors these days seem to me to be more concerned with creating these vast new palaces of art which somehow or other bear their name and have a big new front door than they are of working with the important bread and butter aspects of a museum, which is building up the knowledge of the guards and keeping things friendly and human. And it's as if they want to be famous for expanding the things rather than being famous for running them really, really well. So I think it's rather sad. I mean, given how much is being spent on this new vanity project of creating a new part of the National Gallery which will deal with 20th century art, which it was never meant to do in the first place, that some of that money should be spent on keeping people who work there happy and keeping the place going on a very basic level, and not just dreaming of whole new palaces and massive great buildings and rebuilds.
Yeah, I totted up the amount of money that the National Gallery has raised in its various pots for things like acquiring paintings and redeveloping new wings. And the total world is not far off £1 billion, right? So they are, in one sense, absolutely loaded. And I think there's some sort of structural problem here. I'm sure you're right. It's to do with, slightly misguided priorities at the more strategic direction. But there's something wrong with the system of fundraising, that they can so easily raise nearly £1 billion to buy stuff and build places. But they're struggling to get 20, 30 million pounds a year to keep the lights on and keep the staff employed or reasonably paid. I find that a really extraordinary, flawed system. There must be a way of just a little bit blurring the edges so that you can take something from the billions and put it in paying people properly and keeping, as you say, the doors welcoming and the National Gallery feeling a much more human place for visitors, which I think is really important.
So do I. I think you're absolutely right. And I think, art and museums have taken on this new identity in recent decades. They've become these go-to places that can actually make a huge difference, not just to, somewhere like Trafalgar Square in London, but to entire cities, new cities. You think of what the opening of the Guggenheim Museum did to Bilbao, which turned it into this must-go destination, whereas previously no one had ever gone there. So museums of that sort can turn, as it were, nowhere into somewhere. And museum directors have all been infected by the kind of vanity projects that encourages. They all want to build bigger, more important, and art is no longer really there to make people happy because they're looking at it, or to somehow bring knowledge and bring satisfaction and bring a sense of the sacred. Museums are there to have this big blockbuster impact on a city and make the tourists roll in. And this extra commercialization has led to just a changing of the role of the museum. And I think all these mega rebuilds and huge new art spaces that are being put up around the world, they're really a result of a change in attitude to what a museum can give you. I mean, they're not there to give us more knowledge or give us more friendliness or a sense of the sacred. They're there to stamp the identity of somewhere big on the map, aren't they?
Sure. But there's other stuff they're wasting money on too, Weld. And there's a great one little final example of the National Gallery. Before we move on, I don't know if you saw this, but they launched a project a few weeks ago to have what they call a citizens' assembly. So they were going to gather 50 members of the public, randomly chosen by lottery, to advise them on how the National Gallery should operate in the future. Now, this came as a surprise to me for a number of reasons. First of all, they've already announced what they're going to do in the future, which is build this new wing and expand into 20th century art. So we know all that, and they've raised nearly £1 billion to do it. But the other thing was, when you actually look at the literature and the documentation about what this little group of 50 people, who I'm sure well-meaning, have been deciding and discussing, it's rather sort of, I don't know, esoteric questions like, what is the purpose of art? I just can't quite see the point of this. Now, not least, here's the kicker, right? Do you know how much this project has cost? Finding these 50 people, getting them in a room and discussing these, big picture ideas.
Oh, God. Oh, let me imagine the worst. £5,000.
£250,000.
Oh, absolutely. Today in a nutshell, isn't it? £250,000 on a bunch of, finding 50 people to talk about the gallery. I mean, that tells you all you need to know, isn't it?
They could just ask us for free.
Absolutely. And what's the name of the company that they brought in to choose the 50 people? What was the company's name? It was something extraordinary.
It's one of these third sector. It's a charity, basically, So.
Yeah, but what's it called? Wasn't it the was it the Sortition Foundation? Is that right? Something like that.
Sortition, I think. Yeah.
It's a word I've never heard of before. Anyway, this is what's happening in the modern world. People are being employed to do stuff that makes companies feel good about themselves. I get this in television. Do you know what an Albert is? When I make films, I have to get an Albert certificate. Do you know what an Albert certificate is, Bendy?
No. Are people even called Albert anymore?
See, every film you watch on television now, at the end of it, when they've got the credits on, you'll see Albert certificate. It's been granted an Albert certificate, right? And what it is it's proof that you have been ergonomic and eco-friendly in the making of this film. So, for example, you've taken trains rather than flown places, and when you have group meals with the crew and everything, we've all been eating salads rather than meat. So we've been really good about looking after the planet. And if we prove we've been really good about looking after the planet, we get an Albert certificate, and we're able to put it at the end of the program, right? And of course, you pay money for this. So we pay them money to give us a certificate to prove that we've been eating salad. And the BBC or Sky Arts or whoever, they also pay them money to make sure that they look after us and make sure we're doing these things. So they're getting money from both sides of it. Now, this is something that's going on all over the world, really, isn't it? And these groups that set themselves up as arbiters of certain kinds of good behaviour are coining it. Now, I know that in this case it's a charity and a non-profit organisation and all that, but still, £250,000 or whatever it was you said is a lot of money to earn for finding 50 people to say, yeah, I love the National Gallery. So it's a new strata of middle management in all the areas of culture these days. Very interesting, because they're very, very, very powerful, these organisations now.
Yeah. Do you know what the net effect is, Weld? I was in a documentary recently, just as a contributor, about the history, I think, of Hollywood House, Fairly good program, made by Channel 5. It's been out on television. People can tune in if they want to. But I noticed when I tuned in myself to watch it, but all the bits in the middle between the contributors, which we used to call drama doc. Do you remember in the old days you would have sort of actors dressed up as Mary Queen of Scots or something wafting around while someone like me learnedly expounded the history? Well, now those bits are all AI.
Yeah.
So just, done at the push of a button. Now, I don't know, how energy intensive that is or whether it's actually better for the program. I mean, it looked all right, but the result is by making people and projects more expensive, it just means that the computers are more likely to take over. So, well, I'm not sure about that future, which takes us on, actually. Shall we move on to our final bit of shocking news?
Don't tell me there's more. I'm so shocked already. There can't be more.
Yeah, final bit quickly. The computer's taken over. There was a news story recently about one of these AI authentication companies in art, which did ran their series of AI tests on 2 paintings previously attributed to Jan van Eyck. And this is a picture of St. Francis of Assisi receiving the stigmata. There's 2 versions of it, one in Turin, the other in Philadelphia. And there's been some art historical debate as to which one came first and which one was by Jan van Eyck himself. And guess what? Well, the AI declared confidently that, in fact, neither of them were by Jan van Eyck. So the AI company person said, well, this resolves that. It's bad news for the museums, and now let's move on. Whereas I think we should say, I'm afraid it's bad news for the AI company because it demonstrates the mistakes and flaws in their systems.
Right. I mean, so why did they say that they're neither by Van Eyck? I mean, I've filmed both of these. I remember I've had great fun doing it as well. And I've always thought the Turin one felt a little bit more authentic, if I can use that word here. So
Yes,
what were the
yes.
arguments for it?
That's the thing about the AI. You don't know. It just gives you an answer. They say they plugged in pictures of 20 other Jan van Eycks, and it didn't, the computer didn't think it was by the same artist. But the odd thing about these pictures is actually, I think the attribution to Jan van Eyck is pretty secure, and the one in Philadelphia, which I agree with you, is less good than the one in Turin and probably, a subsequent version or a workshop copy. Actually, the wooden panel on which part of it is prepared is provably from the same plank as a signed and dated Jan van Eyck picture, no less, of one of the Arnolfinis. So I think it's pretty bold of the AI company to come out and say, no, that's all wrong. It's by some other person.
It's bold, but it's also good for business, isn't it? Well, listen, the Waldy stamp of approval always goes to you, Bendy, as a connoisseur, rather than any AI robot telling me that one piece of art is authentic and others not. So I'm with you on this. Boo, down with AI approval of masterpieces. And yeah, I mean, they're both great paintings, and it's a fantastic image anyway. So that should not put anybody off. They're both wonderful.
Lest anyone think that I am simply being pro-human connoisseurs because that's my bread and butter, or that that's what I've made my name in, and just anti-machines because I feel threatened. I would like to point out that I'm not. I think the machines can probably have a role to play, but the problem with how we're doing it at the moment is that we're not putting in nearly good enough data or enough data in order to get a reliable answer from the machine. So I think the best way to think about it is that the large language models we're currently using in other AI spheres like ChatGPT or Claude, now they have been fed basically the entire internet and millions and millions of books. All have been put in, and that's how the large language models get themselves up to speed. The equivalent of how we're trying to do it in the art world is that we're just putting in a small number of not particularly high resolution photographs taken in different lights and just pinched from the internet in some cases, and we're plugging it in and trying to get a definitive yes or no answer. It's the equivalent of asking ChatGPT to work as it is, having only fed it Samuel Johnson's dictionary. So do you see what I'm trying to say? It can work, but we've got so far to go before we can begin to trust it. And until then, everybody, just trust people like Waldy and I. Please, 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 please.
But also, does it matter? Does it actually matter? It's a fantastic painting in both its versions. It unquestionably bears some kind of really close relationship to Van Eyck's original plans and hopes for it. To all intents and purposes, it functions exactly as it should do as a Van Eyck masterpiece. So does the fact that one bit of it may have had somebody else touching it, whatever, that makes no difference at all, does it?
Well, you see, I believe, Wild, in doing justice to the painter, and I think it's an injustice to Jan van Eyck to say he didn't do it, or similarly Rembrandt, or whoever it is. So, and also connoisseurship is really important if we're trying to rehabilitate the works of female artists back into the canon of art history, because they've so often been rejected in the past and given names of male artists. So, no, I really think it does matter. I don't agree with you there.
Okay. Well, either way, we'll never know, will we? Because these are not things that can ever be finally answered, not even by you, Bendor, the great connoisseur that you are. But yes, talking of female artists, let's move on, because there's something happening in art at the moment, right, Bendy? And you may not have noticed it as much as I do, because you're not a daily art critic in the way that I am. So I go to see a lot of contemporary shows. And the fact is that in the air at the moment, buzzing around in pretty much every new exhibition I see, there is this air of spirituality and an apocalyptic mood. It's as if contemporary art has turned its back on reason and facts, and is somehow lurching back into the unknown, into areas of mystery and spirituality. And that, of course, brings me to the Waldy and Bendy Awards this time, and our important search for a certain kind of horse.
The Waldy and Bendy Awards.
Bendy, it's awards time again. We haven't had it for a while because I've not been on and we haven't been making these kinds of decisions, but I've still got the medal. I've got the great Swanee that fine Norwegian artist sent us. It's hiding somewhere on my desk, but as soon as I find it, I'll pull it out and show it to you again, because it needs to be handed out. And this time, we've gone back to the idea of the horse. Now, we've talked about horses before on this podcast, because you, of course, are a farmer. And I don't think you've got any horses, but I know you've got donkeys and you're an animal lover. 3 donkeys.
And, well, I'm named after a horse. Don't forget that.
And you're named after a horse. How can anybody forget that? We all know you're named after a horse. So the horse is close to you. It's in your blood. But I'm not sure the apocalyptic horse is the one we're looking for when it comes to Bendor Grosvenor. But it is when you're looking to me, because I've been encountering them all over the place recently. And this spiritual thing that's going on in art, I've been calling it the war on reason. I mean, there are all sorts of factors involved, and I'm not quite sure why it's happening now, but I think it's principally because people are fed up with the world being the way it is at the moment, so they're retreating almost to a fabled land where things are better. We're going to be looking at horses. So I've got to start, right? And then you can come in with yours. But my first nomination, really, for a Waldy and Bendy Best Horse Award that is not by George Stubbs, for reasons that we've discussed. My first nomination is a thing by Marina Abramovich called The Hero. First of all, you know all about Marina Abramovich, don't you? I know contemporary art isn't your main interest, but you can't have missed her, can you?
I know as much as I have been prepared to expose myself to, Wild.
Yeah. Which is what? That she's a famous Serbian contemporary artist, full stop? Or
well, she's a famous Serbian contemporary artist, and I know she's highly regarded, and every time I have tried to see how that has come about, I have walked away scratching my head. So now over to you to educate me.
Oh, dear. Well, she's probably the most celebrated contemporary artist currently at work in the world, right? Now, that's not my decision, but it's probably true in terms of if you put on a Marina Abramovich show, everybody turns up. She had a huge show in New York about a decade ago that basically involved her sitting there and people coming and sitting down opposite her and looking at her in the eyes. And it was such a big hit. There were people queuing overnight in tents around the museum waiting to go and stare in her eyes.
That's so New York.
It's so New York. But it's not just New York, because she also had a similar thing happening here at the Royal Academy. She's had shows at the Serpentine. She's a genuinely big deal. Her work fetches piles of money, and she's considered a major superstar. And as I said, probably the most famous contemporary artist still alive. Now, what I like about this work, so it's called The Hero. It was originally made in 2001, right? And it shows Marina herself sitting on a white horse, of course a white horse, and holding a white flag. and the flag's kind of fluttering in the wind. And it's originally a video piece. So not only is she sitting there on her horse with her white flag, looking incredibly heroic, really, and riding it rather well, I think, but there was a poem that went with it, all about heroes and how we need the hero in the world today, and how heroes are important, and why it's very significant that we don't have enough of them. So this was back in 2001. So imagine how she must feel today, given the lack of obvious heroes that we have in our political world. But what I like about it, what I find interesting about it, rather, is that, she was Serbian. So she was born in what was previously thought of as Yugoslavia. And her father was a big deal in General Tito's private police. So he was a big, big deal in the Yugoslav communist era, the father, that is. And this work is dedicated to him. And it has a kind of weird nationalistic mood to it, I think, which I find really interesting. Because I don't think anybody who hasn't come from somewhere like Serbia under Yugoslavia, who hasn't got Slav blood coursing through them, and who doesn't have a very romanticized idea, really, of Central European and Balkan history, would have made this kind of image. And I think what I'm interested in is the fact that people love this image, even though I find it a bit spooky, really, because it's the kind of thing that would have been seen as a nationalistic image in the 19th century. And Serbian nationalism, obviously, is been a dangerous force even in the 20th century. So it's a slightly worrying thing. Does that impact on you at all? I mean, does the fact that it looks like one of these Slavic heroes from the 16th or 17th century, is that something you see in it as well, Bendy?
Well, the image that popped to mind when I saw the white flag fluttering in the breeze and the white horse was actually Joan of Arc. But, that again is similarly nationalistic, I suppose, in its historical origins. Well, while I struggled to get past the poem bit, if I'm honest, I thought, the image was nice enough. And I always like to see a horse on telly, a lovely horse. But some of the verbiage, I don't know, I got a bit here. Heroes are universe, said 3 times. And then another one, silence is like an island in the middle of a turbulent ocean. Well,
Yeah.
but no.
But you've got to say it in a slow Serbian accent.
Yeah, it does sound more profound in that sense. But
Yeah.
also, it's video art, and I'm so stick in the mud. Well, I can't bear video art. I just think it's like a film with anything interesting taken out, and because it's so boring, we fall into the trap of thinking it must be profound. But no, anyway, enough of my preconceptions.
Well, I know you think that, and I know a lot of people that like your work think that, because I get the other end of it on in some of the responses to me, because I do like contemporary art by and large, and I certainly like it more than you do. And although I have suspicions about Marina Abramovich, and I can't say I'm a big fan of hers. I saw it in Amsterdam recently. I've just been over to Amsterdam to see a couple of shows, and it's on a big screen with this haunting poem being read out. It's got, slightly Beckett-like vibes of silence, and you can see why people like it. And I think what this, particularly if you're a New Yorker, right, what this gives you is a sense of another reality, a more heroic time, a kind of world to escape into that's so different from our trashy modern world, something big and ancient and past-like. So I can see what she's kind of getting at, and I think it's just, I wanted to bring it in because it does feel as if for me, it sets the tone for what we should be looking at here in our award giving. We should be looking at mighty horses with this kind of resonance of something bigger. So that's why I've proposed it. And it's quite a fabulous image, isn't it? Anyway, we'll move on. Come on, set me right then. You don't like contemporary art, you don't like Marina Abramovich, but I know you like certain other things, so tell me what they are.
No, that was a slur on me, Wild. I do actually love contemporary art. Just not the bits everyone else goes mad about. Anyway, that's a different question. And when you come to my house, you will notice, Wild, there are more bits of contemporary art on my walls here than old stuff. So anyway.
Right, okay, no, you're right. By the way, did you know what Marina Abramovich's zodiac sign is? Do you know what year she is?
Cat? Is that one?
The fire dog. She's the year of the dog.
Okay, all right.
We'll come to you later on with your snake. Go on.
Am I really a snake? Or are you making that up?
No, you're the year of the snake, Benji. I looked you up specially. It's a good year, and snakes are very important things, you know. I mean,
producer Taya is waving to say that she too is a snake, so I'm not feeling quite so bad about it.
Well, snakes are mysterious. They're wise. They're charming. So, yeah, you're all those
of
things, Bendy,
course.
for sure,
Yeah,
for
okay.
sure, for sure. A year of the snake. Well, good job you're not the number one creature in the Chinese zodiac, which is, of course, the creature whose name we don't utter on this program.
I know this. It's the rat.
No,
Don't go
don't
there.
say that word. It's
Don't
an
say
anagram
it.
of art.
Don't
Don't say
say
that
it.
word. People
Don't
will
say
accuse
it.
me of bullying you again. They didn't let last time we mentioned that word, I had nothing but a stream of abuse from the
My
Benedetti
mum.
women accusing me of bullying you. It cannot be mentioned. Okay, it's the
Yeah.
creature whose name is an anagram of art. But that is one
All
of the
right.
zodiac signs. Yeah.
Well, for my choice of a great and interesting horse, I'm going to be going back to the 1480s, and we're going to be talking about Leonardo da Vinci and a horse which he was commissioned to make, a sculpture, a huge sculpture, and which never actually saw the light of day, but it nonetheless was a fascinating and really important horse in the history of Western art. And while I don't know, perhaps while I'm talking about Leonardo da Vinci's lost horse, you can have a little Google and see what Chinese year he is, because I would be interested to know.
Bendor, I
Huh?
don't need to do that. I've done
Oh.
my homework for this podcast. Yeah, we all know Leonardo da Vinci was born in 1452, right? And that
Yeah.
was the year of the water monkey. So water monkeys. So
Oh.
monkeys, they're considered intelligent, witty, highly adaptable. And the water monkey is apparently a mischievous problem solver. That's what it is in the Chinese zodiac. And that fits pretty well, doesn't it?
It fits pretty well with Leonardo. Well, good spot.
Mhm.
And I think he would appreciate that. But because he had a massive problem when he was asked to make this giant horse sculpture in the 1480s in Milan by the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. And the sculpture was going to be a memorial to Ludovico's father, Francesco Sforza, who had conquered Milan. Now, we take for granted, I think, the idea of the equestrian statue now, and we look back to Roman history, and the Romans loved an equestrian statue. So I'm sure if people have been to Rome, they will have seen the extraordinary surviving example of the gilt bronze statue of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, which is in the Capitoline Museum. An amazing feat of engineering where the leg has one of its horses raised, so it's only positioned on three legs. Now,
You mean the other way around? The horse has one of its legs raised.
oh, sorry, what did I say?
You said the leg has one of the horses raised.
Sorry.
No.
The horse has one of its legs
But-
raised. Okay. Now, the thing is, when Leonardo comes along in the 1480s in Milan and the Duke says, "Oi, I want you to make me a giant equestrian bronze horse with my dad on top," actually, this being the time of the Renaissance, some of the skills to make such a thing had been lost. Now, it's true that Leonardo had more modern examples to look at. So, for example, the lovely statue by Donatello from the 1450s called Gattamelata, that's in Padua.
Brilliant thing, yes.
Yeah, we love that. And now, if you look at that closely, well, one of the horse's legs appears to be raised, but actually, look closely at the bottom, and the horse's hoof is resting on a cannonball. So the engineering isn't quite there. Now, Andrea del Verrocchio in the 1480s, he mastered it. He managed to get one leg raised. But, Leonardo, being Leonardo, he wanted to go even better. So we have a series of drawings of initial ideas for this extraordinary horse, and they show a rearing horse. In one of them, there's a soldier being lanced beneath the horse's front legs. When it came to trying to get this to work, even Leonardo was defeated by this idea of the rearing horse, and so he settled for two legs raised. Well, he wanted to have the horse with a front leg raised and a rear leg raised, as if it was sort of prancing along, like dressage in the Olympics. And a series of beautiful drawings show his studies for this. And he got so far as ordering the bronze, and he worked out how he was going to cast it. And he made a giant clay model, which was nearly 7 meters tall once you factored everything in. And then, do you know what happened?
I do, actually. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, I know what happened. The clay model was destroyed by French soldiers who happened to be passing through on one of their many invasions of Italy, and it was completely destroyed, wasn't it? I think he'd actually made the molds and everything. It was ready to go.
Yeah, those pugnacious French, they robbed us of Leonardo's extraordinary, bold, innovative giant horse statue, because not only did they come in and seize Milan and eventually fire so many arrows, they used his clay model for target practice. That fell apart. But Duke Ludovico himself diverted the bronze that was going to be used for the horse to be melted down to make cannon. So the project didn't get very far. But wild, it has an afterlife because it became nonetheless so famous, and Leonardo's drawings circulated and were impressing artists and people like Vasari for decades afterwards. Although the horse was never made, it still managed to have a massive impact in Western art history. So if you think of things like Raphael, he did copies of these drawings. Dürer's famous print of the Knight and the Devil, that's basically taken from Leonardo's drawings. So I think it's a really great thing that, although it didn't exist, it was nonetheless important and very beautiful.
Well, the imaginary aspect of it, of course, makes it suitably apocalyptic. But I like the idea that Leonardo wanted to make a horse that didn't have a rider. So many of the ancient equestrian statues that you refer to, above all, the Marcus Aurelius in the middle of the Capitoline Square, they depend on this idea of the man sitting on the back of the horse, therefore having this regal imperial air. But the horse itself, to be presented this way, that's a different thing, isn't it? I love the idea of it glorifying the whole image, the presence, the being of a horse. And it was gigantic, wasn't it? I mean, it was 25 foot tall, is that right? The original model, which is higher than a London bus. I mean, it must have been an extraordinary thing to dream of doing, this magnificent giant horse in the middle of Milan. But you're wrong on one thing, which is to say that it never got made, because, I mean, I've actually seen it. I've seen Leonardo's horse, or a version of it at least. It's outside the football ground in Milan, in the San Siro Park. Have you not seen it?
Ah, is this the one? Wasn't there some American airline pilot who tried to get one made? Was that his?
Yeah.
Is that his one?
Yeah, his name was Dent, I think. And yes, I mean, he had read somewhere, I think it was in Reader's Digest or Country Life or something, the story of Leonardo's failed attempt to get the horse, or the tragedy of the missing horse. And so he set about making sure that it was done, and he spent his whole life raising money for it. And eventually it was indeed made. I mean, obviously it's a rethinking of it, and no one could make it perfectly as Leonardo would have done. But it is there where Inter Milan play, the San Siro Stadium. And right outside is this sort of sports park. And in the middle of the sports park, you have Leonardo's giant horse looming up above you. So even in its bastardized version, I mean, it's a hell of a thing. There are a giant horse looming over the city like that. Quite interesting.
Well, it gives me a reason to go and watch football in Milan.
Yeah. But listen, let's move on. I've got an even more spiritual horse than that, because I am a big fan of Franz Marc. Now, you know all about Franz Marc, don't you? Because I know you really like German expressionism.
Now, was he the one who died in World War I?
He was the one who died. He died at Verdun in 1916. He was born in 1980. I don't know what year. I must look up what year that was for his animal zodiac. That'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it? But he was a really beautiful and important artist, I think. And amongst the German expressionists, he was probably the one whose work I like the most. And he specialized in horses. That's what he kind of became known for. And they were painted for very specific reasons, and they were always blue, right? So his horses were blue. And that's because, as you may know, according to the German expressionist spiritual colour book, blue was the colour of divinity, of the spirit. So he painted his horses blue. And there are lots of them. And although he died very young, he did produce quite a few of these pictures of horses. But the one I picked out that I want to nominate as the best horse painting that's not by George Stubbs was one called The Tower of Horses, right? It was the most sort of futuristic and modernist of Franz Marc's horses, and it shows a kind of tower of 4 or 5 horses looming up, glowing with this equine energy. And, this was painted probably in 1913. This was a time when everybody in art was looking for, quote unquote, the spiritual. It was a big deal. The Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophy book about the great secrets of the histories and mysteries of religion, that had been this bestseller that had changed everybody's ideas about what you should look for in art. And it was a really big influence on abstraction. So, I mean, these days we now know, because a lot of feminist art historians have revisited this territory, and they've gone back to the idea that a lot of early abstraction was painted not because people had some kind of formal idea that abstraction was important, but because they were searching for ideas to present spiritual imagery, big spiritual thoughts. And abstraction, it was easier to do that than it was with figurative art. Franz Marc was in between, right? So he was sort of halfway between the kind of Kandinsky spiritual end and something more realistic. And because he was German, he believed in this power of the horse. So he painted these horses over and over again. And they have a gorgeous sort of beauty to them. And I think for someone like you, right, you work on your farm and you have a natural affinity with animals. You know, this idea that the animal is a kind of better version of life on earth, that it somehow contains a divine spirit, something powerful, something glorious. I mean, you know what he means by that, don't you? I mean, this is the animal lifted up, if you like, into a kind of divine realm, or something we grubby humans should look up to.
Yes, and incorruptible. That's one of the things I
Incorruptible,
like.
certainly. And you know, he did a frieze of donkeys as well. Do you know his donkey picture?
Oh, I shall look it up instantly.
I know,
Bless
you
him,
know.
he's gone even higher in my estimation.
Yeah. Do you know what? We'll put that up on the website and also on our ZCZ YouTube page. And he painted all sorts of animals. He painted cows. He painted various things. All of them imbued with this haunting spirit, this power of the animal. And he painted this tower of blue horses, which I absolutely love. So that's my nomination for the Waldy and Bendy Award, Best Horse That Isn't by George Stubbs. How are you going to compete with that?
Well, hard to compete with it, because am I right in thinking, well, that this picture is lost?
Oh, yes, I forgot to mention
So-
that. I mean, it is lost. It was lost during the Second World War. Somewhere or other, fell down the back of the Nazi sofa, as so many other things did. It used to belong to Hermann Goering. This is the other thing about Franz Marc. When the Nazis took over, they branded his art degenerate. You know, this whole ghastly story of modern art being degenerate, which, some people, that kind of idea still weirdly lingers on, that it's somehow a fraud, a terrible thing that is a con or whatever. And the Nazis believed it very deeply enough to ban certain artists completely, and Franz Marc was one of them. All his work was rounded up. But of course, Goering, being the sly dog that he was, actually was collecting contemporary art, or modern art as it was at the time, on the side. And amongst the artists he collected was Franz Marc, whose work he adored. And he used to own this picture. And then it got sold to somebody else. Basically, the family that owned it, a Jewish family, escaped from Nazi Germany, went to New York, and they had to leave the picture behind, but they hoped to sell it in order to fund their new life away from the Nazis. And then it got lost. That's when Goering got it and all that awful things happened. So it turned up later somewhere or other, but nobody knows where for sure, and it was basically lost. So it has disappeared from sight, and that gives it, I think, this even extra powerful aura of something significant and spiritually charged. Another lost horse like your Leonardo, but one this time with just tied irrevocably with the major upsets and wars of the 20th century.
Yeah, well, we hope it might turn up, well. And I, just to answer your question earlier, I Googled it, Franz Marc, Year of the Rabbit. Whatever that means.
Rabbit, I do know what the rabbit means. So rabbit's pretty good news. He was graceful, he was kind, and he was sensitive. And all those things are true, actually, aren't they? Because if you look at these beautiful paintings of horses, they are graceful and they are kind. And they certainly are sensitive. So maybe there's more to this Chinese cosmology than we might instinctively think, Bendy.
Yeah. Now, my next choice, well, I couldn't resist it. I'm so sorry. I couldn't, listeners, and you, I couldn't resist going for a Van Dyck, Anthony Van Dyck. Perhaps you can tell me what year he was born in a moment, well, but I'm going to talk about his picture in the Louvre, which is the famous painting of King Charles I hunting, Le Roi à la chasse is his French title. And Van Dyck painted a number of equestrian pictures of Charles I. This is the middle one, so we're talking around about 1636. And actually, it's only half a horse, Wild. I think that's the point of the picture. So it's a giant canvas, about 2 meters and a bit tall, and we see Charles I. He's just got off the horse. He's looking very dashing in his cavalier's hat and his long hair and his lovely white silk top. And behind him, a horse. We only see its front half, and its head is lowered. And they're in a landscape setting. We can see a distant ship in the sea, in fact, and we're standing underneath an oak tree. And the horse's head is lowered, and it's pawing the ground with its front foot. And some people have seen this as an interpretation that the horse is bowing towards the king, and that we're supposed to be impressed with Charles I's authority and his stature because the horse is lowering its head. And I certainly think there's an element of that. After all, part of the point of Van Dyck's equestrian portraits of Charles I was to make this otherwise quite small and spindly figure, the king, look powerful and in control. Do you think he looks powerful here, Weld?
Well, I don't think he looks powerful, but he does look tall, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he was, as you say, a very small man, and the horse in this case looks smaller than him, which would have been wrong. I mean, I can't see how the bending horse, or half a horse in this case, how that doesn't in some way imply a subservience to Charles I, who, of course, was so conscious of his divine right to rule. And there's some sense in which the animals are paying homage to him, bowing before him. And that seems to me an absolute prerequisite for the painting. I mean, it's meant to be informal to some extent, isn't it? It's a sort of Charles out hunting, having fun in that kind of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor way of riding around on the horse, isn't he?
I thought you might like to get that in there. But actually, the reason I've chosen this particular horse, Wild, is because I think it's so crucial to the narrative of the picture. The horse is telling the story. And just to frame the story I'm going to very quickly tell you here about this painting, we need to go back actually 30 years and see a very, very similar equestrian portrait of Charles I's older brother, Henry, Prince of Wales, who, because Henry, Prince of Wales, died, Charles became the heir and therefore the king. And this painting of Henry, Prince of Wales, hunting, has a horse behind him, just like we see here, and it's painted by an English artist, Robert Peake.
Oh, yes.
And actually, if you put a lot of these Van Dycks of Charles I, if you see them in sequence, and you put them next to Robert Peake's portraits of Henry, Prince of Wales, you understand immediately that a lot of the pictures Van Dyck was asked to paint by the king were a kind of, a sibling rivalry. And a younger brother, perhaps with a slight chip on his shoulder, needing to demonstrate that he was bigger and better, and he had better artists. And so Van Dyck comes along and replicates this particular pose of Robert Peake. The original by Robert Peake is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Now, there's one key difference, Wild, and it's why the horse is telling the story. In the Robert Peake of Henry, Prince of Wales hunting, the horse is just shoved in the background. It's kind of not really there. What we see instead is Henry with his sword drawn. He's just killed the stag that they're hunting, and you see the stag lying there on the floor, dead, right? Now, in this picture, we don't see any of that, but we know it's happened because the horse, if you look at its mouth, it's slightly foaming and it's panting, right? And the reason it's pawing the ground is that the hunt has just finished. The king has just got off the horse and the horse is absolutely exhausted. And we know that Charles I has killed the stag. We don't see the dead stag and we don't see the sword drawn. But if you look closely, one of his hands is ungloved. His right hand is ungloved and he's holding the glove in his left hand. And the sword is back in its sheath. So we are just arriving at the end of the hunt, where the horse is exhausted, he's been chasing the stag. The king has got off his horse, he's drawn his sword, he's done the business. But because he's the king of England, because he's better than his brother, because he's got a better artist, he could just leave all this up to our imagination. And he looks cool and regal and authoritative. And, well, the apocalyptic point about all this is that it was all a fantasy and just an illusion, because we all know what happened to Charles I. Well, he got hunted down in the end, and that was the end of him.
Oh, indeed. Well, you can't half read a lot of things into these pictures, Bender. I'm in awe about all the detail you bring
It's
to
art
it.
history, Well.
No, it's art history, but art history at a deeper depth than most submarines ever get to. It's a strange picture, isn't it? I mean, he just looks slightly wrong to me. Maybe it's because I know that he was a short man with funny teeth, and it somehow the whole idea of him pretending to be this heroic hunting figure in his red pants doesn't strike an authentic note. And I love the hat, the big hat. That's slightly unusual too, isn't it? You don't often see Charles I looking quite as dashing in his Dutch-style riding hat, perched at a cocky angle. I mean, it's a complete fantasy, isn't it? Typical Van Dyck to make of this small, glum, miserable, tragic figure, this attempt at something heroic and big, and yet, he doesn't quite pull it off. I mean, to me, whenever I see this picture, it's someone going for something but not quite getting there. That's how I feel about it.
Well, I place the blame for that on the king himself and not the artist. But, hats like that I think should come back into fashion world. I think you look very good in one.
Charles I gave Rubens a hat band. Have you heard about the hat band?
Did he? No?
Yeah, when Rubens came over to paint the banqueting hall ceiling, and he was obviously feted by everybody, and everybody was in awe of his work, and Charles I rewarded him with a hat band studded with diamonds.
I was going to say, not much of a payment otherwise. Well, it's got diamonds in. That's a good bargain.
Yeah, no, a big hat band studded with diamonds. And I agree with you. Hat bands should come back studded with diamonds. In fact, male jewellery should come back altogether. I mean, Charles has he wears pearls in his ears, doesn't he? I have a couple of good things in my ears as well sometimes when I'm not wearing headphones. But male jewellery, hat bands, I'm all for all of it. They should all come back.
Yeah, male jewelry in all sorts of places. Well, the mind boggles. Now, let us move on.
Quickly, very quickly. I am going to go to my final attempt to persuade you of the greatness of certain kind of apocalyptic horse art. And I've gone for my old hero, Rembrandt, of course, and possibly what I think is the greatest, certainly one of the greatest of all Rembrandts, and it's the Polish Rider. I've talked about it before on this program because it's Polish and it's a rider, and I love all those things, and I'm kind of obsessed with it. So it was painted probably around 1650. It hangs in the Frick collection in New York, which I know you have some issues with because the attendants there have sometimes told you to step further away from the art, which is very naughty of them, and I don't agree with them doing that to you, not to the great Bendel Grosvenor. But I've been there and I've filmed it carefully, and they let me get very close to it. It's a fantastic picture, really amazing bit of mystery. Nobody quite knows what's going on in it, but basically we see a figure, a young man, riding across a parched, burnt out, desolate-looking landscape, and he's riding a white horse. Very important white horse. And what is he carrying? He's carrying a bow. So he's an archer. And he's got this costume on as well, and which we may be able to talk about in a moment. It's quite significant whether it's Polish or not. I think it unquestionably is. But what's really important about him is this presence in this parched landscape, the horse riding along. What the hell is going on here? And there's been enormous amounts of discussion about what Rembrandt has painted. And some people have said it's a portrait of somebody. But I don't know about you, but I just don't feel this is the right kind of proportion to be a portrait of somebody.
No, I agree. Yeah.
You don't see enough of the figure's face, and the horse is so much the star of the picture.
Well, it's telling a story, isn't it?
It's telling a story, right? But what is the story? Do you have opinions about the story, Bendy?
Not as many as you, World. I think you should go first, and I'll try and shoot them down in flames.
I do have opinions. Well, listen, I think it's back to our obvious subject when it comes to these late Rembrandts, which is religion. There has to be something religious going on here. And as you know, out of Rembrandt's entire oeuvre, about 30% of it had kind of biblical connotations of one form or another. So either he painted religious characters or scenes from the Bible or people dressed up as biblical characters. And I think this is a religious picture too. But what was happening in around the 1650s in Holland? Now, interestingly, we had Andrew Graham Dixon on recently talking about Vermeer, and you might remember his book was very big on the religious makeup of a lot of Vermeer's images. And he was making the point over and over and over again, and indeed that's been challenged, but I happen to agree with him, that a lot of Vermeer's art, but also a lot of Dutch 17th century art, was impacted on by these religious considerations that were swirling through the country and kind of impossible to avoid. So various things were going on, but it all boils down to this idea of Protestants versus Catholics. So obviously the Protestant Revolution was taking place across Europe around these times and growing in force and angst. And indeed, in the 1650s, Europe had just recovered from the 30 Years' War, which was the single most tragic, ghastly, violent, deadly war that Europe has ever seen. I mean, they estimate around 8 million people may have died during the 30 Years' War. And most of it took place in central, what we now call Central Europe, which is to say sort of Germany, bits of Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. But it had implications everywhere and was famously barbaric and terrible. And it fed into something else that was going on at the time, which was all sorts of millenarian fears about the end of the world. Now, we all know that a lot of history has been spent by people wondering when the end of the world is going to come. And Bible readers in particular, and of course Rembrandt was an absolutely inveterate Bible reader. We know that from so much of his art. Bible readers were waiting for this moment, this great return of Jesus, the second coming, they called it. And after Jesus returns, after a period of turmoil and tribulation, as it's called, there'll be this fantastic period of 1,000 years when everything will be wonderful in the world and Jesus will rule across a new Jerusalem. So everybody believed in this thing, that there would be an end of the world and there'd be this 1,000 years of peace and glory and a new Jerusalem. And people who believed in all that were called millenarian thinkers, right? And this was predicted to happen at various times, of course. But one of the main things that were being said around the time this was painted was that the end of the world was going to come around 1659. So someone had sat down and worked out this was when the second coming was on its way. Now, imagine you're in Europe, right? You're in Amsterdam. You're really of a religious bent like Rembrandt. You have religious views that are specifically Christian, but not necessarily tied either to Catholicism or Protestantism, but somewhere in between, and you've seen Europe descend into this bloodbath, this terrible fight between all sorts of powerful people, powerful men, the Holy Roman Emperor, etc., over religious squabbles, and you've seen 8 million people die in this religious tussle. You could well be sucked into this idea that the second coming is on its way, that the millenarian epoch awaits. And that's the background, I think, for this picture, right? That's the background for it. Now, when the apocalypse comes, something very important pops up and rides through the world. Now, you know who that is, don't you? Who rides through the world during the apocalypse?
Well, the horsemen, I can see where you're going, but there's normally 4 of them.
There are 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? And do you know the difference between the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse?
Well, one of them's very dead, is a skeleton, right?
Well, the horses is what counts. They're all a different colour. They're a different colour, Bendor. There's a red horse, a white horse, a black horse, and a pale horse, right?
Oh.
And the pale horse is death, and the black horse is famine. So they have these identities of what they are. But the one that interests me and interests you, and should interest everybody looking at this picture, is the white horse. So the white horse, the first horseman of the apocalypse, rides, right? The first horseman of the apocalypse carries a bow. Okay, that says that specifically in the book of Revelations, that the horseman who rides the white horse carries a bow and a crown. Now, what does this white horse represent? It's obviously been seen in various ways. The whole book of Revelation has been seen in various ways. But there was a very strong idea that he represents conquest, and in particular, the Christian conquest. So this idea that the white horse, the first horse, is a goodie, basically, not a baddie, that he represents the second coming of Christ, if you like, and that this time of tribulation will be followed by the great millenarian revival of 1,000 years. And I'm suggesting to you that what Rembrandt has painted here is the first horseman of the apocalypse, and that he's riding a white horse, that he's carrying a bow, that instead of a crown, he's got his Polish fur hat on because the crown wouldn't have suited him, and that he's a kind of embodiment of the Christian warrior riding towards Jerusalem, where the new Jerusalem will emerge and Christianity will conquer. And incidentally, if you look behind him, one of the places he's riding by on his journey, do you see that domed roof right at the very top, that mysterious domed building?
Yeah.
There was only one domed building of that sort in Europe, or wider Europe at the time, and that was the dome of Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. So the Ottoman domes, the Ottomans had turned it back into a mosque, but it was originally a Christian church, as you know, built by Justinian. But that shallow, unmistakable shape of the dome is Istanbul. So I'm suggesting to you that after these terrible wars, not just the 30 Years' War, but also the war against the invading Ottomans, Christianity is riding towards the New Jerusalem on the white horse, the first horseman of the apocalypse. The millennium is on its way, and that this perhaps is what Rembrandt is implying at least, and perhaps describing specifically in the Polish rider. What do you think of that?
Well, it's a lovely theory, Wild. It's deeper than even my deepest thoughts on some of these pictures.
And no swans mentioned.
Not yet. I'm sure you're getting there. I think it's definitely somewhere sort of Middle Eastern. I think you're right about the domed building in the background, although I do recall seeing in Rembrandt's drawings he likes a domed roof. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I wonder if it's a little bit more of a specific kind of soldiery person, because you're right, he has a bow, but he's also got a sword, and he happens to be holding in his hand the most lethal looking hammer that you've ever seen. I mean, you wouldn't want that swinging towards you. The only thing I'm not sure about with these is the horse, because you say it's a white horse. I'm tempted to see it as more of a grey horse, and the main reason I want it to be a grey horse is because this might not be a picture of a Polish rider, but a Polish horse, because there's a type, as you know, I'm sure you know, there's a type of Polish horse. What's it called? It's called a konik. Am I pronouncing that right? Which is grey like this.
Konik is Polish for horse, so that just means horse.
Okay. Well, I'm looking on Wikipedia here, and there's a type. It says it's a sort of subspecies of Polish horse called a konik, and I'm going to read out what it says about characteristics, of the Polish horse, the konik. Yeah. It says, the breed has a strong and stocky build, a small head and a straight profile, and a thick mane, Wild.
Are you getting at something here, Bendy?
No.
Are you being waspish again?
It's the year of the snake, Wild. I can't resist.
You beast. Listen, there are Polish horses, and they run forever. They're full of stamina and strength. But the guy was wearing a Polish outfit. I mean, the Poles were famous for wearing very tight red trousers. That's very me as well, I admit. And he's got tight red trousers. The thing he's holding, the mace, that's a specifically Polish mace. Although, interestingly, I did a program about this painting once, and the way he's holding it, if you look at the way he's holding that mace in his right hand, if he actually unfolded his hand and lifted it up, if you look at it carefully, the mace would be the wrong way around. So the pointy bit would be going backwards, and the handle would be pointing forwards, which would be completely useless because you can't bang anybody on the head with the handle of a mace. So Rembrandt has actually toyed with the correct anatomy of the situation in order to make it look more dramatic. But look at the face of the Polish rider. There's something lovely and glowing about it. It's been suggested it might be a portrait of Titus, Rembrandt's son, but I think there's meant to be something kind of mysterious and slightly otherworldly too about his face.
Well, it's a glorious painting.
Fabulous picture. And of course, stupidly, there was a time when that dreaded Rembrandt project went around and questioned its authenticity. I mean, they were questioning all sorts of things. But I love it, and it's a really, really, really good reason to go to New York to the Frick Collection to see it. And I'm sorry you don't agree with me wholeheartedly and won't ride to battle with me, believing that the Rembrandt's horse is actually the first horseman of the apocalypse riding a white horse. That's my contribution to spiritual horse discussions for the day. So let's finish off the competition properly now, Bendy. So we've talked through them all. Taya's been listening carefully. Let's write down our scores for what we think is the right order for these. So from 5 to 1 in terms of importance, and above all, spiritual significance, because that's what we're really looking for. So whilst we look at the pictures for a moment again, and whilst our audience has a chance to make up its own mind about the best of the horse pictures that are not by George Stubbs, we'll be writing down our numbers, and Taya will be adding them up, and we'll see what's going to get the coveted Waldy and Bendy Award, the coveted Swanee, for the best picture of a horse that isn't by George Stubbs. Let the truth be revealed, Taya. I'm hoping everybody's made the right decision. How are we doing with the best horse that's not by George Stubbs?
So the best horse from lowest to highest, in lowest place, it is Marina Abramovich, the hero.
I'm not surprised by that, but okay. Sorry. I mean, she might be the most famous artist in the world, but she's not the best horse artist. Okay.
In fourth place, Van Dyke.
Yeah, I was expecting that. Yes.
Yeah, it's only half a horse.
Only
isn't
half
it?
a horse.
Only half a horse.
Only
Yeah.
half a horse. Yep. In third place, we've got Leonardo.
Oh, yeah, the
Horse drawing.
great football horse. Yeah.
Great football horse. And then in second place, we have Franz Marc.
Oh,
Tower of Horses.
beautiful Tower
yes.
of Horses.
Yes.
And that means, of course, that people have made the right decision.
Yeah.
Yes, in first place, Rembrandt's Polish Rider.
Oh, that's so good for my spirit. I tell you, it makes me feel that the past month of hard work hasn't been lost. Bendy, that's fantastic. It's a fabulous picture. I think we'll all agreed on that.
The reason I also made it number one, is because it's just a brilliant picture of a horse. He hasn't done any of the kind of, I'm going to make this a heroic, sturdy horse for the benefit of my rider, Rembrandt. No, he's decided to just, as Rembrandt would, paint a lithe, vigorous horse, which is just streaking its way through the countryside. So, no, it was a slam dunk for me.
Excellent. Well, Polish horses are always alive and vigorous. What fun to be on the podcast with you again, Bendy. I like to bring down the tone, as you know, and I think I've done that successfully on my return. But yes, everybody can watch all the things again on YouTube, on the ZCZ channel, and we'll be back soon, I guess. But from me, it's a very, very horsey bye-bye.
And a cheerio from me. See you next week.
Waldy and Bendy.